Welcome back. The State Department has announced it will begin revoking visas for Chinese students. Secretary of State Marco Rubio saying that his department will, quote, aggressively revoke visas for Chinese students, including those with connections to the Chinese Communist Party or those studying in critical fields. We will also revise visa criteria, he said, to enhance scrutiny of all future visa applications from the People's Republic of China and Hong Kong. Beijing strongly opposes the move, accusing the United States of unjustly revoking visas under the pretext of ideology and national security. Joining me now is Gatestone Institute senior fellow and the author of Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America, Gordon Chang. Gordon, good to see you. Thanks so much for being here. And we know that the Chinese Communist Party has been abusing student visas for decades. Your reaction?
Yes, well, the 2017 National Intelligence Law of China requires Chinese nationals to commit acts of espionage if demanded. But also the Communist Party's top-down system means that no Chinese national can disobey an order from the party. So China has weaponized students, and it's about time we recognize that. And I think that Secretary Rubio did exactly the right thing. You know, people may say this is drastic, but we had a situation which was an emergency, and finally, we got an administration willing to do something about it.
I wrote all about it in The Cost, my last book, in terms of looking at workers and students stealing intellectual property and going back to Beijing. One was caught at the airport with a one-way ticket with all these hard drives and soft drives in her pocket from Motorola. I write extensively about that. How do they get away with it?
Well, they get away with it because we let them get away with it. So, for instance, we allow Ministry of State Security agents and Chinese consular officials to monitor, coerce, and surveil Chinese students on our campuses. And they do that at every place where there are a large concentration of Chinese students. So this is on us, Maria. And finally, you know, we're going to say, no, we're not going to allow this to occur on our own soil.
Yeah, this took courage, Todd.
But I guess my question is, Gordon, still? Question mark? Because I feel like you have been beating the drum on all of the dangers from top to bottom when it comes to the CCP, especially when it comes to the university system. And yet, I feel like there hasn't been enough activity so far, and I'm worried there's not enough activity now to stop it.
Well, let's just point out that Joe Biden completely allowed it, and he canceled the China initiative. Right. Explain it, Gordon.
Yeah, the China initiative came from the first Trump administration, where the FBI and the Justice Department were going to have enhanced investigations of Chinese nationals and others who had very suspicious relationships with the Communist Party. And the Biden administration, one of the first things they did when the president took the oath of office was to cancel it. They said it was racist. Well, no, it's not racist, because China has weaponized its own nationals.
Right.
And if we don't understand that, then we're not going to protect ourselves, as Todd was talking about.
Yeah, still. I mean, the China initiative went away 4 years ago.
Yeah, and clearly there is a need for it, because China has actually made sure that its nationals steal our stuff. 13% of Chinese students, according to one study, were committing acts of espionage against the United States. Now, we don't know the number for sure, but that's a large number, especially when you consider all the number of Chinese nationals studying in our universities. 277,000 last year, down from about 387,000 pre-COVID.
Yeah. Mark?
13%? That's crazy. Look, as an NVIDIA shareholder, I have to ask you about what's going on with the export controls on chips to China. I'm going to ask you who's right, the Trump administration or Jensen Huang of NVIDIA? Because Jensen's comment yesterday, he said the U.S. has based its policy on the assumption that China cannot make AI chips. The assumption was always questionable. Now it's clearly wrong. And he's saying that with these export controls in place, China's still going to do what they're going to do in regards to AI, but U.S.-based companies are being disadvantaged. So who's right here?
Mark, I love you, but I gotta say the Trump administration is right. Jensen Huang will say anything to sell chips to China. Okay, that's a business person's responsibility to increase profits. But clearly, sanctions can work. Our sanctions have not been effective, but we've designed our sanctions not to be effective. We sort of roll them out, give the Chinese a long time to adjust. Then they're not comprehensive. Then we don't enforce them. So, of course, our sanctions aren't working. But Jensen Huang is wrong, because sanctions can work. And in this case, they absolutely have to.
Because those chips are empowering Communist China, which is trying to compete on a serious level with the United States when it comes to AI.
Yeah, well, I don't mind them competing with us.
Yeah.
Every nation should compete with us, but our friends compete with us. But China is using AI to make its military better to be able to kill Americans. And that's where we need to draw the line.
What do you say to those people who, by the way, we spoke yesterday with an esteemed lung cancer surgeon, Dr. Jeffrey Port, was in the studio yesterday talking about the fact that when it comes to medical research, China is catching up. They're catching up to the United States. We have to be careful. We can't have like a brushstroke in terms of cutting funding, because we're cutting funding for things like research on cancer. So what do you want to say to those people who say, well look, you know, we train these Chinese students and other international students, and then we send them back to Beijing, and in and of itself is empowering adversaries?
Well, it certainly is, because a lot of China's progress is due to people who have studied in the West, specifically in the United States. Now, this is a really difficult issue because some Chinese do stay, like my dad stayed, for instance. But he wasn't a scientist, but he was an engineer. But yeah, we should not be cutting funding for R&D, because this is absolutely critical, because this is where the competition with China is going to be ultimately.
Well, so I guess the question that I was asking yesterday is there a way to cut funding from these Ivy League schools to ensure that they stop the anti-Semitism, but put guardrails in place to ensure that we still have money to study things like, you know, curing cancer?
Yeah. Well, you know, with regard to Harvard, there are a lot of issues there, because Harvard was engaged in activity which was clearly unacceptable,
Yes, that's
probably illegal. And also, you know, we had to do something about Harvard. But that doesn't mean that you cut off money for research, because research is being done in a lot of places besides Harvard.
Yeah.
And we can deal with this. But there are a lot of issues here.
There's got to be a way to continue smart work and ensure that what we're investing in is what we want to be investing in, as opposed to, you know, gain of function research in Wuhan, right? What is your take on the headline of the day, this federal trade court ruling against the president's tariffs? They're citing a lack of authority to implement this under this emergency law. The president has ordered American chip software suppliers to stop selling to China. You know that. And a White House spokesperson said that the Commerce Department is reviewing exports of strategic significance to China. In some cases, Commerce has suspended existing export licenses for imposed additional license requirements while the review is pending. Look, one thing I love about this administration is they know exactly the behavior of Communist China. And President Trump zeroes in right on it, and he's right.
No, he's absolutely right. You know, on the court decision, we had a $1.13 trillion merchandise trade deficit last year. That's got to be an emergency. And so clearly, I think the court is wrong. But, you know, as Mark said, there are other ways to do this. We got Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, and we got the Trading with the Enemy Act of 1917. And by the way, Maria, the Tariff Act of 1930 bars the importation into the U.S. of goods made with forced labor. And most, if not all, well, most products from China are made with forced labor, especially their green products. President Trump can ban those products from coming into the U.S., tariffs or no tariffs.
Yeah.
The president has a lot of tools, as Mark mentioned.
It's true.
Well, and I have to say, Gordon, going back to the illegal activity at the border, I mean, Chinese had the #1 activity when they were infiltrating our southern border. Couple that with 300,000 visas. I mean, at some point, we have to put our foot down and stall and immediately cease all operations and activities with China.
Yeah, because the Communist Party uses every point of contact with the United States to take down our society.
Yeah.
And we're being overwhelmed. And until we get our handle on it, Mahek, we've got to cut and sever those contacts.
This is a really important conversation. So glad we had it. Gordon, always a pleasure to tap into your wealth of knowledge. Thank you.
Thanks.
Gordon Chang. Stay with us. We'll be right back.